All right, thank you all for coming again and facing the weather to get here. We have a great panel here. This first panel, we're talking about wartime sexual violence and international law. We're talking about the work that lawyers and investigators are doing to document these crimes. And we have two great experts for you who are working in Ukraine on these issues, who will provide us insights on the challenges and realities of their work. The panel will last about 45 minutes, so have a chance at the end of the discussion to ask questions. For those of you here, you should just address your questions to the owl. That's to speak loudly and clearly. But if they can't hear you, that's probably to come up to the front and ask your question. For those online, you use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So we have a great moderator today. I'd like to introduce Alexandra Lilly-Cather. Alexandra Lilly-Cather is an international criminal lawyer and co-founder of the Emergent Justice Collective. Their specialized interest is dedicated to strategically investigating and understanding the intersectional dimensions of core international crimes. Their work follows a trauma-informed intersectional approach with respect to engagement with affected communities and the design of responses geared towards equity, healing, and justice. So thank you really for moderating, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Kelly, for the kind introduction, and congratulations to all organizers convening this important solidarity evening tonight, and also for convening a conversation on international law and wartime sexual violence in Ukraine. We all know and are seeing at the moment, but also historically, that patriarchy, unfortunately, is a prevalent system of oppression at work in our societies, both during peace, but also during wartime. And thus, as we are seeing, plays its role in the occurrence of mass violence, not limited to, but also including, and we will talk about this tonight, sexual violence and also other forms of gender-based violence. Alongside patriarchy, other interlinked, intersecting systems of oppression, such as homophobia, but also transphobia and others, further expands the targeting of persons and communities as part of state violence in conflict. Bodies, in particular women and queer and trans bodies, are targeted by state and non-state armed actors in conflicts around the world, while children and men are too affected in their own ways. Today's conversation, as Kelly already mentioned, here's about the work of two experts working on accountability for violations of international human rights law and international criminal law in Ukraine today, including their work on the Commission and impact of sexual and gender-based violence and support for survivors in that regard. In terms of running order, and before I give over to the two incredible persons who are joining us today, I'd like to mention that both will present their work, and there will also be a possibility for a Q&A for the audience as mentioned. Once they presented their work, I will first ask some questions to get us going, but then please feel free to, probably you have to stand up and come to the front so we can all hear you online. I'd also like to say hello to all those that are joining us, not in Berlin from Akut, but virtually. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. It is my true honor to first introduce you to Daria Rusokata. She's a specialist at the Analytical Center of the Ukrainian Women's Law Association called UrFem. That is the first association of women lawyers in Ukraine, and it is intended to become a platform for the exchange of experience, development, and support of women in the legal profession. Daria is a lawyer, a PhD student at the Department of Social Law at the Ivan Franko National University of Lviv. For more than 2 years, she worked in the public authorities at the Prosecutor General's Office and the State Environmental Inspection of Ukraine. Critically for this conversation is that currently Daria is moderating a series of public dialogues where the Analytical Center of UrFem reviews the judgment of the International Criminal Court, particularly those where the issue of conflict-related sexual violence was raised. Our second speaker is Karine Adot, who has been working in the field of international criminal justice for already over 20 years. After working as a legal advisor for the trial chambers and the presidency of the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, she shifted her focus to the investigation of international crimes. She has been a gender specialist and sexual and gender-based violence investigator for the United Nations team of experts on Kasai in the DRC and the United Nations Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan. And she's currently having this role with the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. Between 2015 and 2018, she worked already in Ukraine in Luhansk region. And given our limited time frame for this discussion, and without further ado, I'd like to give the floor now to Daria. Daria, hello. It's so amazing you're with us today. Can you please tell us more about the work your organization does of your firm at this moment in time, perhaps also how it has changed, and particularly the work you're doing or engaging in support of survivors of sexual violence, and what you're doing to advance accountability for such violations of international law in Ukraine.
Thank you for the presentation, Lily, and it's a pleasure to be there and to hear you all, to see you a bit, and I'm glad to be there remotely and to tell you a bit what we're doing actually in Ukraine now, because now a lot of people, they're working with survivors either abroad and in Ukraine. So as Lily mentioned, I'm from Ukrainian Women Lawyers Association. I'm working in the analytical center. It's one of the department of our organization. We also have center Jurfam Education, which provide different educational webinars and workshops also for lawyers who work with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. But about that a bit further, actually about our work, the February 24 has changed us all, and law is quite flexible and must reflect and respond to circumstances in society. So actually our organization is also responding to challenges to women's rights, and the full-scale invasion gave us a chance to a rapid response to all our goals and help us to focus on society's request. And as we saw from the news and actually heard from the people, one of the society's request was conflict-related sexual violence. Actually, not a lot of lawyers, they realized what to do with that people and how to help them, even in legal different questions. In particular, we have started a work on launching a strategic litigation. We call this project Jurfam Support. It's a kind of initiative that aimed at helping survivors of sexual violence, rape, sexual harassment, etc., as well as survivors of all forms of gender discrimination. As Lily mentioned, that actually the problem of sexual violence, conflict-related, is not new. And actually in the conflict, Russia's war against Ukraine, the use of sexual violence has taken place since 2014. But after the full-scale Russian invasion, the aggressors' troops used sexual violence as a method of waging war on an unprecedented scale. In particular, they intimidate, punish the civilian population on the occupied territories. And actual sexual violence is used against women, men, and children. And actually, we also met with these cases. In this our project, Jurfam Support, we have already created a team of lawyers who are from Ukraine. They are ready to join to our strategic litigation. We are training them with our another department, Jurfam Education. They actually had an opportunity to work and learn the legal side of the cases and psychological side of these cases. They will work on these cases already. Actually, we had few of them. Some people, they are abroad, some survivors, they are abroad. They fled, actually, on the beginning of the war when they were on the occupied territories. Actually, if the person has suffered from the sexual violence, we'll provide for the survivor a legal advice. Also, we will find a lawyer in the region of survivor. For example, if the survivor was from the Kiev region, but now The survivor live in Lviv, so we will find the lawyer from Lviv, and we'll try to find a lawyer. For example, if this person decided to work only with a woman because if it was a woman, she afraid to be with men. We also saw such cases. So we try to find a lawyer who will be a woman, actually. And if it was a man, or if it was a boy, we also had these cases. So we're trying to find him a lawyer who will be a man. It's also quite important for that. Actually, we pay for this service if they don't have some funds. And if it's abroad, and as I mentioned, we have already such case, we use all legal tools for communicating with the survivor and providing legal and other types of support remotely. If it's necessary, we try to draw up individual security plan. Sometimes there are such difficult cases and the person really need this security plan. Also, we're ready to provide information about also shelters, other public organizations or psychologists who work in the region of survivor, and ready to help them. We cover different cases. It's not only rape or sexual violence, it's also sexual harassment and other cases of discriminations which based on sex or social status. Actually, it is important for us to develop positive judicial and law enforcement practices in these cases and to restore justice for these survivors. About justice, probably I will talk a bit later. So probably that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing this first overview over your work and really already showing the multifaceted character of engaging in accountability work and engaging in accountability work around sexual violence, which takes like more than just working with the law, but really also working with people and understanding their specific needs at this specific moment. Turning over now to Karine. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's a true honor to have the sexual and gender-based violence investigator and gender experts of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry for Ukraine with us. Karine, can you tell us about the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry and more closely about your work on sexual violence and gender-based violence?
Thank you very much, Lily. And it's a pleasure for me to be with you and Daria in this panel. I mean, definitely the topic can take hours, but I will give you just an overview and also give the possibility for those from the audience who are interested in knowing more about the work of the Commission of Inquiry and other institutions of these types to find the information they would like to find. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine was created by the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, through a resolution that was adopted on 4th of March 2022. There was a subsequent resolution a little bit later that also completed the resolution and also indicated some geographical focus for the beginning of the work of the Commission. In this, the Commission has a wide mandate, but if we're talking about the investigation of human rights violation and international crime, we can say that the Commission has been tasked by the Human Rights Council to investigate all alleged violation and abuse of human rights and violation of international humanitarian law and related crimes in the context of the aggression against Ukraine by the Russian Federation. It also tasked to establish the facts, the circumstances, and the root causes of any such violences and abuse. And the Commission is also mandated to collect, consolidate, and analyze evidence of such violation and abuse. And it includes the understanding and the analysis of the gender dimension of these violations and crimes, which is very, very important. Finally, regarding the investigative task, it's also task, when possible, to identify perpetrators. So this is a very big mandate because, as you know, there's been many violations or allegations of violations in relation to the ongoing situation in Ukraine. Of course, I cannot speak about, the details of our work. There will be reports that will be published. There will, at the end of the mandate, and there will be a first interim report also published very soon and presented very soon. But I think what is important to mention is that the work of the Commission is based on a victim-centered approach, which is I think the crux now of our work when we are investigating, especially when we are investigating sexual violation and gender-based violations. Something that is also very important when we're talking about the victim-centered approach of our work and our method of work relates also to what we call the informed consent. So we have to make sure the people we interact with understand the process and understand what's the meaning also of sharing their experience with us, because they have to trust us and they have to trust what we're going to do with their stories. We know very well that it takes a lot of courage to come forward and to share experience of such violations. So this has to be done in the way that makes the survivors confident in the work that is being done and in the process. That's very important. I mean, this is very general, and it's not only proper to the Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. This is the basis of our work, and we have also always to remember that the victims are the most important person when we are investigating such crimes. The other thing that is important is also for everybody to understand that it can take time for survivors also to be comfortable sharing their stories. And we have to allow this. I would say that documenting the crimes is not a competition. I think it's a duty that we owe to all the victims. But we have to make sure we wait for them and we are with them, that we're not pushing them. This is very important, that they are basically at the center of the process that will take place. So if it can be an introduction about the work, about the main things that focus and direct our work, that is the victim-centered approach, the informed consent and the confidentiality of the process. I think that's just what I would like to present at this stage, if it's fine.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think this gives us a really good basis to dive into some of these concepts later. And thank you so much for introducing the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry for Ukraine to the audience, but also some of the fundamental pillars that guides its work along the way. And if anyone has questions about what it means to engage in informed consent or a victim-centered approach, we can dive into this later. Daria, I have a first question for you, and perhaps this is already a really wide one, so I'm sure you have lots to share. But I think when talking about sexual violence in the context of Ukraine at the moment, I'd love to hear from you and share with the audience who is directly affected by the violence. So are there any particular persons or communities that are specifically targeted? But then also, can you share any observations how this violence affects the larger community? So persons who may not be directly affected by the violence, but they are still impacted by sexual violence that occurs in the context of the conflict. And lastly, can you speak to how this works inside of Ukraine, but also transnationally? So we have seen anti-abortion movements, anti-abortion laws in Poland, which is a country in which many survivors are, but we've also seen further acts of sexual violence occurring to those who have fled the conflict in Ukraine and in third countries, such as Germany as well. So any information or observations you can share from your point of view and your work would be most valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily. I understand and realize that we are limited in time, but I will try to briefly explain. So actually, who is affected by CRSV? We see survivors of sexual violence, that there are women, men, and children. If we talk concerning who suffer directly or indirectly, actually directly, we see that mostly there are cases where suffered women, but also we have cases where it was children actually, and even some boys that are under 18 years old. And if we talk about survivors who suffered from the violence indirectly, so probably you saw in mass media that one woman was raped in front of his child. So actually we can call this child that is actually a person who affected indirectly. And actually, according to the international legislation and national law now, this child has to have also medical aid, psychological aid, and also legal aid in the future. Also, we discussed in Ukraine now so widely the question of forced pregnancy. And if we talk about children, so often these children that we call children of hate, who are actually from mothers who were raped, especially in the conflicts. And now we just try to guess what actually how to behave with these children, which approach we have to use for that, because it's the new generation and we have to implement, if I can say, if I can use this word, implement them into our how to say, society. And we understand that they can't feel that they are another or other people and something like that. And if we talk about impact, which has sexual violence inside Ukraine and abroad, so Ukrainians are influenced by the news in the mass media or personal stories from survivors, and the trauma caused by the use of rape as a military tactic will lead to deep suffering across Ukrainian society for years to come, to be honest. And before the full-scale invasion in society was a quite high level of social stigma. So it's kind of a tendency to distinguish survivors from other members of society. It was a tendency concerning sexual violence or rape people due to the culture, some peculiarities and stereotypes which we had in our society. For today, this tendency is changing a bit, what actually we see, and when we realize by who was this women raped, and still exists this tendency where public authorities who work with these survivors, they analyze the previous sexual behavior of the survivor, and they try to analyze next further sexual behavior of this person. But according to the international practice of the International Criminal Court, we understand that this is forbidden, if we can say this, use this word, because when we analyze previous sexual behavior of the person, it's also traumatized this person. And if we talk about the situation and impact on the society abroad, so after news from occupied territories and cases of CRSV, people, they tend to go abroad where they can feel safe, but they can also be affected by sexual violence during the time of seeking safety and asylum. We also heard some stories from Poland and other countries, and we talk actually about the high risk of that. Another side of this coin, that people who were suffered already on the territory, on the occupied territory by Russian soldiers, who were suffered by CRSV, they mostly go abroad because they feel that they're also more safe. And when a woman gets away, it looks like she's safe and she's far away from the guns and the man who raped her. And we know that, as you mentioned, Lily, that in Poland still a lot of Ukrainians, and actually there are more women with children. And at the same time, we know that Poland's abortion laws, where abortion is forbidden, actually it's also kind of problem because survivors, and I mentioned before forced pregnancy, women who face with this problem, they try to look for opportunity to get this abortion or to look for emergency contraception, and they have to go to another country, for example. And it's also the high risk of sexual violence from other people because they are already suffered from the sexual violence. So they're a bit, they're psychologically more weak, if we can use this word. And actually it's also the problem. Another problem also how survivors can get medical aid abroad, because not all services is possible to have, and also it depends on the country. And today actually we had the public dialogue from our organization, and we discussed the new problem is HIV. So actually women who were raped and they faced with this problem and how to actually deal with this obstacle abroad. And some of they try to look for contacts from organization from Ukraine because they already know how they help. So if there are among audience some people who know how to help these people with problem HIV, so I just recommend you to share this information. If you know some Ukrainians, probably they didn't tell you that they are survivors by sexual violence, but if you just can share this information, just do it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for talking us through some like really firsthand information, but also showcasing that the impact of sexual violence is long lasting. It goes across borders, it goes across communities through families, and is also not just psychological, but also medical in ways that we may not think or imagine. So please, if anyone knows, contact the organizers and we'll forward it to Daria. Karine, back to you. And you already spoke about some of the pillars of your work, including confidentiality, informed consent, and a victim-centered approach. And in that regard, I wanted to ask you what are some of the systems or referral mechanism that the COI either has already in place or worked on to really ensure that there's a multifaceted support system available for survivors who agree to work with you and to further your mandate. But also, what are some of the systems you have in place to really ensure that some of the intersectional dimension of sexual violence that we talked about, where women, men, children, but also LGBTIQ persons and communities are definitely affected. I give over to you.
Thank you. Well, I will talk about the strategy, let's say, more in a general manner with regard to COIs. In my experience, the first thing I would say is that UN Women is providing an expert in HGBV investigation and on gender issues to such institutions which already put some expertise regarding specific questions and topics that you mentioned. There's also something that we have acquired through experience now. There's been guideline and best practice that has been identified and established, which are also quite important in our work, especially when we are working in such a situation as Ukraine. I think also one of the most important things when we talk about, you mentioned, the referral system is also ethics. So, and when we talk about the victim-centered approach, it's really putting the persons first. Each individual has their own needs, their own security risk, and their own history experience. So that's how we have to take. That's what we have to take into account when we ensure that the well-being of the people we interact with is taken into account. So in all cases, in my experience as an investigator, when we start engaging with someone, we have to assess what is the impact of our interaction with the person who we are, the person we are interacting with. So it's not only, setting up, let's say, an interview, identifying a location, but also making sure that their needs are met. And for that, there's a lot of work that is done beforehand in identifying service providers, support systems for the person. So everybody has their own needs. There's definitely not one size fits all answer, and we make sure that we can provide this support before we go further. And sometimes what happens is that the person is in such a situation that it will not be possible, for example, to share their experience right away with us, but our duty, our ethical duty, is actually to make sure this person is safe. So that's what guides our way of working. So and this goes for people who have just one specific need, or people who have different needs because of the intersectional dimension of their vulnerabilities, of their experience.
Thank you so much for talking us through in practical terms of how you meet these really sometimes grave practical challenges in really receiving the information you need to further your mandate, but also making sure people are safe and looked after before, during, and after they provide information to use the Commission of Inquiry. It's now 23 past the hour on my clock, and I want to respect everyone's time and also the rest of your evening. So we already have one question in the Q&A online, and I just would like to ask that question to both of the panelists, and then also open up the floor to the audience in Berlin for any questions. So anyone who has a burning question can now come to the front. I unfortunately do not see you anymore, but I will check in with you in a second again. So the question comes from Emily Kenny, who is from UN Women, who provided the expert to the Commission of Inquiry, which is an incredible framework to ensure that gender expertise and intersectional expertise can be found in bodies such as commissions of inquiry. And she has a specific question to Karine, which is, how does the investigation of sexual violence in Ukraine differ from other contexts? And does it make a difference that the government of Ukraine is expressly supporting the Commission of Inquiry?
Thank you, Emily. Maybe the first difference that we see in this specific body is that it was put in place very quickly after 24th of February, even if the operationality of the body itself had to wait a few months, because you need to find the staff and you have to make it operational. So that's, I think, one of the first difference I've seen with other situations where commission of inquiries were set up, or bodies similar to commission of inquiries were set up a bit later on, after the beginning or even at the end of a conflict. The second thing, maybe the second difference I might see in relation to some other similar bodies is that they are already access to the country, which sometimes can take months of years after the crimes and violations have been committed. So it's an advantage. It can also sometimes be a difficulty, because the situation continues to evolve as the investigation is going on. So this is a situation that has to be taken into account. The other thing is that we already see some accountability mechanism running regarding some of the crimes and violations that have already been committed. So that's something also to take into account when working and when investigating violations and crimes.
Yes, thank you. I see there's a question in the audience. I do see you, which is amazing technologically that this is possible. But thank you so much for talking us through this, right? That there is definitely some advantages to the fact that you can already access the situation under investigation. But as we all see from the news every day, the situation is ever evolving, and to keep track of this is definitely an occurring challenge. So I see at least one person who raised their hand in the audience. So please step forward and ask any questions you may have.
Hi. Firstly, thank you very much for your presentations and the work you're doing. It's very important. I have a question to Karim. The victim-centered approach is very important. It's very important to address the victim. But one thing which I find also is important is prevention and the perpetrator. I mean, the obvious solution would be to raise people normally, not to be, sorry, but that is not the option now. And you mentioned something about investigations of the perpetrators. And I think that it is a very important component of prevention that both the Russian soldiers and people in other countries that take advantage of refugees must know that there will be consequences for their actions. And the question I wanted to ask, what form of information on the perpetrators can we expect? Like, is there going to be information on particular military units, on their particular names of perpetrators? Because they will have to be tried if they're still alive.
Just a very quick one. So, and actually, it's a good link with Emily's question. So there's access to the country, also great collaboration also with the government of Ukraine that allows the access to the country. So also that makes investigation a lot easier, you know, when you can access countries, because for some other commissions, for example, you don't have access at all sometimes to the territory. So that's a great advantage. Regarding identification, you have to understand that investigations in crimes, and international crimes, crimes against humanity, war crimes, for example, are usually very complex, very long. However, they are criminal investigations, and you can get information. You get information regarding the acts that were committed, the facts, but also you can get information about the perpetrators. You can get information about, indeed, the units, if we're talking about members from military units committing crimes, but you can also obtain information regarding individuals. So it's not impossible to do such a thing and to achieve such a result. The only thing I would like to add is that people are usually used to have results very quickly. You have to understand that some of these investigations sometimes takes years. So also that provide frustration, not only for the survivors, the victims, but for everybody involved. But sometimes it's a reality that one has to accept in order to ensure that investigation is done properly, and then prosecution is done properly and justice is rendered.
Daria, I just want to check in with you. Do you have anything to add on this particular question or point as it relates to your work?
Actually, a bit. Wanted to ask, have you ever heard concerning the first case on Ukraine for rape by a Russian soldier? Actually, it's a question for the participant of the panel, not panel, but from the audience. Yeah, I just briefly that we have in Ukraine already the first case, and actually our generally say government, they found this Russian soldier. They tried to look for different recordings and the places where were bridge violations. I mean, Vitsche and Kiev region, probably you heard, and already we have this first case, but we have also some challenges with this case because the questions of confidentiality is, the situation with confidentiality is awful there, because all information, all personal data of survivor was all people in Ukraine, they can read the personal data from that person, where she lived, her members from the family, and actually what this soldier did with her. And now we also try as an organization to amending into a criminal code, a criminal procedural code of Ukraine, changes that personal data can't be in publicly concerning survivors of CRSV and sexual violence in general. And probably you wanted to ask how to find this person who was perpetrator also. I'm not sure, but just to ask, because nowadays technologies, they are so helpful to look this person, and also our soldiers, they can get them into captivity, and they will search for them, etc. So it looks much easier if you do it nationally than internationally. Probably Karen also that mentioned before.
Thank you so much for adding these points from your perspective and work, Daria. It's 33 minutes past the hour now, and I just want to look around. Is there another question, or should I give over back to you, Kelly?
There is another question.
Let's take it.
Ask a question, that would be good.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm wondering, maybe it's more the question to Daria. I've heard that the victims of those crimes are not quite feeling sure to share those stories at all. And we heard the stories and the rumors, but in the very beginning, it was really hard to identify those people. And we've seen what happened after Russians left Kiev region, and we were suspecting that there might have been such situations, but very little percentage of the survivors would address the state bodies and the police, because first it's stigma, second it's fear, it's psychological distress of such a level no one can ever imagine, and it's also probably no trust after such cases, as you just mentioned, Daria, of the leakage of the personal data of the person. I can imagine that percentage would be even lower of people who would share those stories. I'm wondering what are the steps that the state or the civil society might take to make those people feeling comfortable to share those stories, because that is probably one of the biggest challenges in the way to investigate those crimes. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's what we work with. First of all, we have to provide survivors, survivors need to know where they can find that help, and we need to give them the opportunity to get this help. It's not only medical help, but legal aid, first of all, and to document these cases. Recently, we had a case from Mariupol where the woman was raped, and she actually didn't want even to speak with us. But her husband, he tried to communicate with us. Actually, after that case, we realized that people who surround survivor, they're really important. So we need to work also with members of their families, and they actually need to know how to work with their close people, how to work with their husbands or with their children or with wives, etc. Not only like lawyer or a medical assistant, etc. Second is the question of confidentiality. Confidentiality, we already work with public authorities, and we you actually work with prosecutor's office, that they need to hide information about survivor. And if we talk concerning the case which I previously mentioned, so they already hide this information, personal data. So we are really happy for that, because not all people will see it anymore. And they were drafting together the law which provides that information about survivors will be hidden from publicity. And we realize also that mass media around the world and in Ukraine, they have to change their behavior, because if we show all cases where the person was leaked, how actually it also won't work, because the person survivor by CRSV, they will realize that all people around the world will see what happened exactly. And recently I found international act or norms for mass media, where they publish information how they actually need to behave. So we want also to spread this information among other media in Ukraine. And I hope that if you will find this information in your countries also, please share this information, because I know that from different countries in Europe, they also share information and some personal data of survivors. And actually, it's each of us can do this and to prevent this kind of actions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this response, and also really showing us how much more you are doing, quote unquote, just beyond the practice of the law, right? You're really engaging in community and understanding how the harm is happening, but also how it trickles down and who needs to be involved to really provide effective support networks to survivors, and really bring investigation and understanding of such crimes forward. So huge respect for your work, and thank you so much for sharing this, both of you. I just want to take, if I may, 2 minutes, one for you each, to share with the audience why, from your point of view, is it important to particularly raise attention to the issue of sexual violence in Ukraine, and how the audience, both online and offline, can stay updated about your work, or even get in touch with you if they want to. I start with you, Karine, and then Daria, before we close.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's important to ensure that survivors of sexual violence and gender-based violence are put in a position where they feel comfortable sharing what happened to them. Because if it's not part of the narrative, it will be like it didn't happen. We know there's a lot of allegations of sexual violence, a different type of sexual violence against many people. So it can be women, of course, that's what we hear most often, but also men, boys, girls, older people. And, you know, it's really something that we need to put in the discussion. The second thing is, of course, to respect survivors and their wish and how they want to be involved in the process, when time is good for them to be involved in the process, and of course, listen to them regarding what is their definition also of justice. Then for the second part of your question, the Commission has a website, a webpage on the website of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And if you find this page, there's an email address where people and organization can make submissions in relation to the date of the Commission, and also I can be reached at this email address.
Great, thank you so much for this closing. Over to you, Dari.
Thank you, Lily. So their understanding of justice and needs for each survivor could be different, as we understood. And these needs are from different spheres of life, and people have to understand how the justice and needs look to help and support survivors. We can't be somewhere because we're already in the place where survivors surround us, and sometimes we even don't know where they are. And actually, it's very important to mention in our organization always that time is really very important, especially in these cases. But we have not to make mistakes because of the time. And we can't do it in a hurry. We can't do and change, amend legislation, etc. We have to think concerning that. And regarding your question, how to be in contact with us, we know that some survivors of CRSV, they are abroad. And so if someone of you knows Ukrainians who could be survivor of the CRSV or not, just share the information about our project initiative, Jurfam Support. So these people, they can call us. They can write us different messengers, Telegram, Viber, etc. Or you just can fill out the application form, which is on the official our website of the UFRAM, and we will contact with this person. Thank you for attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making it possible that we all could join virtually. I hope you have an amazing rest of the evening. I wish I could be there for the rest of the panels. Enjoy the art exhibition, and I hope it's a really successful evening for everyone who is there. And don't forget to donate to the amazing organization that donations are being carried out for. So back to the organizers, and huge shout out to Callie and Valerie who supported the organization of this panel.
Yeah, thank you, Lily, Kaveen, and Daria for spending your Friday evening with us, and sharing these very important and interesting insights. Thank you again, and we wish you could be here too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.